Only 6 people witnessed it. 6 people in a back room in Hong Kong, 1972, and every single one of them went quiet for the rest of their lives about what they saw. Not because they were paid, not because they were threatened, because there are some things the human eye isn't supposed to see. Some things that happen so fast, so completely, so absolutely, that the mind can't file them under real. It stores them somewhere else, somewhere between memory and mythology. This is the story of one of those moments. We're going to rewind, back to the beginning, back to the man who walked into that room thinking he was about to make a name for himself, and instead walked straight into the most humiliating, most transforming, most terrifying 3 seconds of his life. His name doesn't matter now. It never really did. But Bruce Lee's name, that echoes forever. The setup. Hong Kong in 1972 was electric. Not just politically, not just culturally, the city was vibrating with something harder to name, a kind of collective hunger. A generation that had grown up beneath colonial shadows was suddenly watching one of its own become something the world had never seen before. A Chinese man on international cinema screens. Not a servant, not a villain, not a joke, a god. Fist of Fury had hit theaters the previous year and broken box office records across Asia. People had watched Bruce Lee destroy actor after actor on screen with a ferocity that didn't look like choreography, because for Bruce, it wasn't. The moves were real, the speed was real. Every controlled explosion on camera was just the smallest fraction of what he actually was, and the martial arts world knew it. That was the problem. Because when a man becomes a legend while he's still breathing, 2 kinds of people emerge from the shadows. The first kind, those who bow. The second kind, those who can't stand it. Victor Kaslov was the second kind. The name was well known in certain circles, the underground fighting circuits that moved like smoke through Southeast Asia in the early 1970s. No formal tournaments, no trophies, just backrooms, wagers, and men who built their identities entirely on their ability to break other men. Kaslov was Russian-born, raised partly in Eastern Europe, partly in Macau, a place where cultures and violence mixed freely. He was 6'2", a solid 230 pounds at his leanest, mostly neck, shoulder, and ego. He'd trained in Sambo, a Soviet combat system built for efficiency and brutality. No ceremony, no philosophy, just put the man on the ground and make sure he stays there. He'd won 31 consecutive underground matches. 11 of those ended in under a minute. He was, by every metric available in his world, dangerous. And in 1972, Victor Kaslov was in Hong Kong, sitting in a tea house on Nathan Road, surrounded by 3 of his associates, when someone at the table made a mistake. They mentioned Bruce Lee. Kaslov's reaction was immediate. Not anger, something worse, amusement. He leaned back in his chair and let out a slow laugh that had no warmth in it whatsoever. "The movie man," he said, in English for the benefit of the table. His associate, a local fight promoter named Danny Chung, shifted in his seat. He'd seen what Bruce Lee could do outside of cameras. He'd been at a private demonstration at a gym in Kowloon, where Bruce had done things with his body that made seasoned fighters go pale and quiet. Danny knew what Kaslov didn't. He tried to redirect the conversation. Kaslov wouldn't let it go. "These film fighters," he continued, waving his hand dismissively, "they train for cameras, for slow motion, for looks. You put them against a real man?" He shrugged, made a sound like a dismissal, like the matter was already settled in his mind. "Kaslov," Danny said carefully, "you don't know what you're talking about." "No?" He raised an eyebrow, looked around for support. His associates gave him nervous smiles, the kind of smile that means please stop, but comes out looking like agreement. Then show me, introduce me to your movie star, let me shake his hand. He said shake his hand the way certain men say it, like a threat wearing a greetings clothing. Danny looked at his tea, said nothing. But someone else at that table, someone whose name history hasn't bothered to preserve, made the second mistake of the afternoon. He said, I can arrange that. It didn't happen immediately. These things never do. There's always a corridor of time between the arrogance and the consequence, a hallway where a man can feel brave, feel certain, feel like the world is about to confirm what he already believes about himself. Kaslov used that hallway productively. He talked, he sparred with his associates with the loose, careless energy of a man warming up for something casual. He ate well, he slept well, he trained his usual routine, heavy, grinding, punishment-based, and felt the solidity of his own body like armor. 3 days passed. On the evening of the third day, Danny Chung called him. Tomorrow night, Danny said. His voice was flat. A private meeting, very small. You'll get what you asked for. Kaslov smiled into the phone. Good. Kaslov, a pause on the line, heavy and long. I want you to understand something before you go. What? Another pause, then, whatever happens tomorrow, I tried to stop it. He hung up before Kaslov could answer. Kaslov stared at the receiver for a moment, then he set it down and laughed, the laugh of a man who has never had reason to take warnings seriously. He went to bed early, slept like a stone.
The escalation. The location was a private space above a training hall in Mongkok. Nothing remarkable about the building from the outside. Painted yellow, 3 stories, the kind of structure Hong Kong had thousands of, practical, dense, unremarkable, the kind of building that keeps secrets without even trying. Inside, upstairs, the room was maybe 40 feet across, bare wooden floor, high ceilings, a single string of overhead lights that cast everything in a clean, unambiguous white. No shadows to hide in, no atmosphere to soften what was about to happen. 6 people total. Danny Chung, 2 of Kaslov's associates, a local martial arts instructor named Wei Feng who was there as a witness and had spent the last hour quietly regretting the decision, a documentary filmmaker whose camera equipment sat untouched in the corner. He would later say he never turned it on and that this was the wisest choice of his professional life. And in the center of the room, standing with his hands at his sides, wearing a plain black t-shirt and dark trousers, looking for all the world like a man who had arrived early for something unremarkable, Bruce Lee. He was 31 years old, 5'7", maybe 135 pounds, soaking wet. His arms, if you were measuring without context, were not impressive arms. His frame, against a doorway, would not make anyone stop and stare. He was looking at the wall when Kaslov walked in. He didn't turn around immediately. That detail, that single detail, would stay with everyone in the room for decades, because it wasn't dismissal, it wasn't arrogance, it was something stranger and more unsettling. It was patience. The patience of something that has no reason to be in a hurry. Kaslov entered with the physical confidence of a man who had built his entire identity on taking up space. He filled the doorway. He scanned the room the way fighters scan rooms, mapping exits, distances, surfaces. His eyes moved to Wei Feng, to Danny, to the 2 associates, and then finally to the figure standing with his back turned at the far wall. He took 3 steps into the room. Bruce turned around. Their eyes met across 40 feet of bare wooden floor. Later, much later, one of the people in that room would describe the moment this way. It was like watching someone point a gun at a knife, and the knife wasn't worried.
Kaslov saw a small man, his brain, trained by 31 victories and a lifetime of physical certainty, immediately began the automatic arithmetic of violence. Weight advantage, massive. Reach advantage, significant. Combat record, overwhelming. He felt the familiar settling sensation, the thing that happened before every match, where the outcome arranged itself into probability in his chest. He felt good. He felt ready. He almost smiled. Almost. Because something stopped it, some signal from somewhere below conscious thought that he couldn't name and couldn't silence. Something about the way Bruce Lee stood, something about the absolute stillness of him, the way he occupied that spot on the floor without shifting weight, without blinking tension away, without doing any of the thousand small physical negotiations that human beings do when they're in the presence of potential threat. He wasn't managing his nerves. He had no nerves to manage. "So," Kaslov said. His voice was casual, practiced casual. "You're the famous Bruce Lee." "I am," Bruce said. His English was clear, accented, direct. "I've seen your films." He let the word films carry its full cargo of condescension. "Very impressive for films." The room held its breath. Bruce said nothing. His expression didn't change, not a twitch, not a flicker. This was, somehow, more unnerving than anger would have been. Kaslov pressed forward. He crossed half the distance between them, slowly, the way men cross rooms when they want their sighs to arrive before their words. "I wanted to meet you," he said. "I have a question." "Ask it," Bruce said. Kaslov stopped, maybe 15 feet of floor between them now, close enough for conversation, close enough for everything. "What you do in those movies, that speed, those movements," he tilted his head. "Is any of it real, or is it all—" he made a gesture with his fingers like something disappearing into air. "Camera tricks." The question was a dare wearing a question's clothes. Everyone in the room knew it. Wei Feng quietly moved 2 steps backward. Danny Chung studied the floor with the intense focus of a man who wishes he were somewhere else entirely. Bruce looked at Kaslov, looked at him like a carpenter looks at a piece of wood before deciding where to cut. "What would convince you?" Bruce said. Kaslov smiled, finally, the full smile, the smile that had preceded 31 victories. "Show me something," he said. "Anything. Show me this famous 1-inch punch I've heard about." He spread his arms wide, an exhibition, a trap, an absolute certainty. "I won't even move." Silence. The overhead lights hummed. And then Bruce Lee said 4 words so quiet and so even that they barely disturbed the air. "Are you sure?" Kaslov laughed. His associates behind him relaxed slightly. The laughter gave them permission to. The tension in the room slipped for just a moment, that half-second window of human looseness that opens when someone laughs. "I'm sure," Kaslov said. He planted his feet. He rolled his shoulders back. He pressed his chest forward slightly, the unconscious armor display of a large man making himself a target. His chin came up. His arms hung loose. He was, in his own mind, allowing this, granting it, a demonstration for a film star. He figured it would feel like a solid push, maybe jolt him back a step. He'd been hit by heavyweights. He knew how to absorb. He was already calculating how he'd receive it, that compact frame driving forward, that small fist making contact. He was ready. He was completely, absolutely, catastrophically wrong about what ready meant. Bruce Lee moved. One moment there was 15 feet between them. The next moment there wasn't. The motion wasn't a step. It wasn't a lunge. It was something that the human eye, even trained, even expecting it, could not track in real time. Later, every witness in that room would describe it differently, because the brain, confronted with something it cannot process at full speed, reconstructs the event from fragments and guesswork. What they agreed on, the distance closed, the fist connected, and Viktor Kaslov, 230 pounds of combat-tested, professionally violent, supremely confident human being, left the floor.
not staggered, not pushed, left the floor. He traveled backward 8 feet and hit the wall so hard that the sound echoed in the stairwell below, where the building's owner would later say he thought something had fallen from a shelf. He collapsed down the wall in a seated position, both hands flat on the floor at his sides, his legs extended, his head hanging forward. He made no sound. For a long moment there was no sound in the room at all. Bruce Lee stood in the center of the floor, exactly where he'd been, right arm still slightly extended, body already returning to stillness, to that terrible, absolute calm. He didn't look at Kaslov. He looked at the wall above him, as if the wall was more interesting. 3 seconds. That's what Wei Fang would say years later to the small handful of people he ever told this story to. The whole event, the crossing of distance, the strike, the impact, 3 seconds, start to finish.
The aftermath. Immediate. Nobody moved. Not Danny Chung, not Wei Fang, not Kaslov's 2 associates, who stood near the door with the blank, rearranged faces of men whose understanding of the world had just been quietly demolished and were still waiting for the new version to load. The filmmaker stared at his camera equipment in the corner, didn't touch it, wouldn't touch it. Some instinct older than ambition told him this moment didn't belong to a lens. It belonged to silence. And silence was exactly what it got. Kaslov sat against the wall. His legs were straight out in front of him. His palms were still flat on the floor. He wasn't unconscious, his eyes were open, but his eyes were doing something strange. They were moving slowly, deliberately, the way eyes move when the brain behind them is conducting a very urgent audit, checking systems, verifying data, trying to reconcile what the body just reported with everything the mind had previously accepted as truth. The audit was taking a while. His chest was moving, breathing. That was good, that was something. But the breath was shallow, stunned, the breath of a man whose rib cage had been introduced to a force it had no framework for. Not pain, exactly, not yet. Pain would come later, in waves, over the next 3 days, spreading across his sternum and into his back with the slow patience of a tide coming in. Right now, it was something that had no name in any language he spoke. Bruce Lee turned away from the wall. He looked at Danny Chung. Danny was already looking at him, had been looking at him the whole time, the way you look at something you need to confirm is actually happening. Bruce's expression was unchanged. If anything, he looked faintly tired. Not physically tired, the kind of tired that comes from repetition, from having this conversation with the universe over and over again, from being perpetually the proof that people refuse to accept until they have no choice. "Is there anything else?" Bruce said. The question was genuine, completely, undramatically genuine, as if he were wrapping up a meeting, as if what had just happened were an agenda item now crossed off a list. Danny shook his head, slowly, like a man in a dream. "No," he said. His voice came out smaller than he intended. Bruce nodded once. He walked to where he'd set down a small towel at the edge of the room, the only object he'd brought in with him, picked it up, and walked out the door. His footsteps on the stairs were unhurried, even, measured, and then gone. For a full 10 seconds after the sound of his footsteps disappeared, nobody in that room said a word. Then one of Kaslov's associates, a broad, thick-necked man from Vladivostok who'd seen significant violence in his life and prided himself on being unshakable, sat down on the floor. Not because he was hurt, because his legs had decided they needed a moment. The silence that follows myth. Wei Fang left first. He would later describe walking out of that building and standing on the street in Mongkok for a long time. The city moved around him, taxis, voices, neon, the ordinary beautiful chaos of Hong Kong at night, and he stood in the middle of it, feeling like a man who had just witnessed a private eclipse, something astronomical, something that rearranged the sky for the people who saw it and left the rest of the world completely unaware. He didn't tell anyone for 6 years. Not because he'd been asked to keep quiet. No one had. There was no pact of secrecy, no agreement, no pressure. He simply found, when he tried to describe it in the days afterwards, that the words that came out were insufficient. They made the story sound like a bar boast, like exaggeration, like the kind of thing men inflate to seem interesting at dinner tables. And it wasn't that. It was the opposite of that. It was so far on the side of understatement that language itself became the problem. Every sentence he tried felt smaller than the truth. So he kept the truth whole, kept it unspoken, kept it safe inside him where it couldn't be diminished. Danny Chung told one person, a journalist he trusted, a man named Philip Tao who wrote long-form features for a regional magazine and had a reputation for accuracy over sensation. He told Danny the story over dinner, without embellishment, the way you relay a scientific observation, just the facts, in sequence, with honest admissions about what could and couldn't be confirmed. Philip listened to the whole thing without interrupting. At the end, he sat for a long time with his chopsticks resting across his bowl. "Will you print it?" Danny asked. Philip considered. "If I print it the way you've told it, no one will believe it. They'll think it's a promotion something. They'll think it's a studio plant." Danny nodded. He'd expected this. "And if I exaggerate it to make it believable, then it isn't the story anymore. It's something else, something lesser." He picked up his chopsticks, set them back down. "Some stories," he said, "aren't for print." He never wrote it. The story moved instead the way real stories move, through whisper networks, through closed circles, through the particular underground of people who trained seriously and talked carefully. Martial artists who'd met Bruce, fighters who'd been in rooms with him, instructors who passed it to their best students like a piece of doctrine. By 1973, a version of it existed in 5 countries. By 1975, in 12. By 1980, it had absorbed other stories, merged with other legends, become part of the vast oral mythology that surrounded Bruce Lee's name the way atmosphere surrounds a planet, invisible, essential, present in every direction.
The Legacy. Bruce Lee died in July 1973. He was 32 years old. The world received this information with a kind of collective refusal. People heard it and sat down. People heard it and cried in public, who had not cried in public in years. People heard it in countries that had only begun to know his name and felt the loss of something they couldn't quite articulate, the loss of a possibility, maybe, the proof that was still arriving, the man who was still becoming. In Hong Kong, the grief was physical. It moved through the streets. And in a room somewhere in Mong Kok, in the memory of 6 people who were in that room a year before, the loss had a specific texture. They had seen something that the rest of the world had only approximated through film. They had been in the same space as the real thing, the undiluted, camera-free, myth-free, actual human being. And they knew, with the certainty of first-hand witnesses, that whatever the films had shown, it was less than the truth. It was always less than the truth. The footage was never released, because there was no footage. The filmmaker made his choice and left his camera closed. Years later, someone asked him why. He thought about it for a long time. "Because," he finally said, "anything I recorded would have been smaller than what I saw, and I didn't want to be the man who made Bruce Lee smaller." No one challenged him that way again, not in rooms like that,
not with that particular combination of arrogance and ignorance, the assumption that what the eye couldn't immediately measure didn't exist. The men who knew didn't challenge. The men who didn't know never got the chance. What survived was the legend, expanding like all true legends do, outward and inward simultaneously, gaining weight as it traveled, becoming more real the further it moved from the original event. Victor Kaslov walked into that room to prove something to himself. He walked out with something more valuable, a question he'd spend the rest of his life trying to answer. Bruce Lee walked in with nothing to prove, and that is precisely why he was the most dangerous man in the room. Not the biggest, not the loudest, not the one with the record or the reputation or the architecture of muscle built for intimidation. The most dangerous man in any room is the one who has done the work that nobody saw, the one who has been building, quietly, completely, in the hours before dawn and after dark, across years that don't make headlines. The one who has nothing left to prove, because the proof is already inside him, finished, refined, ready. In 3 seconds on a bare wooden floor in Hong Kong, 1972, one of the most important lessons a human being can learn was delivered without a single word. Skill is not something you inherit. It is something you build, brick by brick, hour by hour, in the long silence before anyone is watching. Bruce Lee built his in that silence, and when the moment came, the silence spoke. Only 6 people were in that room. The story reached millions. Some truths are too large to stay contained. If this story hit something in you, subscribe. New stories like this every week. Stories about the moments that happened before the cameras, before the history books, before the legend became legend. Hit the bell. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, because the best lessons never come from the biggest man in the room. They come from the one standing quietly at the wall.